As a human being, you have two main methods you can use to produce force: muscles and elastic structures. Acceleration is heavily dominated by muscular force. There's no pre-existing momentum to build off of, and the ground contact times are longer. Max velocity, on the other hand, is heavily dominated by elastic force. Every time your foot hits the ground, the Achilles gets stretched out like a rubber band.
Yeah, straight A student, but I'm friends with the cool kids. Following the rules in the rubric. Freestyle on the...
What's up? My name is Dr. Zach Geiser, and this is the GT Performance Podcast, where we have a conversation all about athlete development. If you're looking to develop speed, agility, strength, power, health, and character, you're in the right place. Before we start, though, I want to remind you that the information in these podcasts are for educational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice for you or your athlete. Consult directly with a healthcare professional. Now, today, I'm going to help you never get caught from behind again. We're talking about max velocity. So most of sports happen in short windows. You sprint for 5 to 10 yards, then you slow down, you stop, or you change direction. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you have wide open space in front of you, and you have to be prepared to open your legs up and get downfield fast. When that moment comes, you need to have trained for it. Just ask Buda Baker and DK Metcalf. If you ever have to do a sprint that is 30 yards or longer, this episode is for you. Sprinting has two phases, acceleration and max velocity. We've previously worked through the former, so today we're diving into the latter. If you need a refresher, see our last episode for acceleration-based stuff. And you can see in the picture here, the one on the left, Lyra's working through acceleration, and one on the right, she's working max velocity. She's horizontal on the left, she's vertical on the right. By definition, at max velo, you're not going to get any faster. Your goal is no longer to build up speed because you've already reached the maximum velocity that you're going to hit. Our new goal is to maintain the speed that we've built up. Everyone slows down at some point, but if you have efficient max velo mechanics, you can stay faster longer than the rest of the competition. Remember though, we talk about acceleration and max velocity as if they are two distinct categories, but that's not really how this works. It's more of a continuum. Your first step has a ton of acceleration characteristics, with each subsequent step having less acceleration characteristics and more max velocity characteristics. The transition from acceleration to max velocity is fluid, not sudden. A sprint can be likened to the gradual rise of a jet taking off down the runway. A plane doesn't turn 90 degrees straight up in the air after it gets off the ground. It gradually inclines over time. That's what your sprint should look like. You shouldn't abruptly transition from a big horizontal lean to an upright posture. You start off horizontal in the first step, then each step becomes slightly less horizontal and slightly more vertical. Though the goal has changed, max velo is still a force game. As such, the North Star objectives are almost the exact same as they were in the acceleration episode. Apply a lot of force, apply that force quickly, and apply that force at the correct angle. From the apply a lot of force side of things, our first subcategory is to get springy. As a human being, you have two main methods you can use to produce force: muscles and elastic structures. Acceleration is heavily dominated by muscular force. There's no pre-existing momentum to build off of, and the ground contact times are longer. Max velocity, on the other hand, is heavily dominated by elastic force. Every time your foot hits the ground, the Achilles gets stretched out like a rubber band. This creates elastic potential energy. As you roll over to push off of that foot, the rubber band is released and the elastic potential energy is converted into kinetic energy. To capture as much elastic force as possible and have a short ground contact time, you want to have a stiff Achilles tendon. And I'm going to tell you more about that in just 1 second. But I want to look at this picture here. The first picture shows the unstretched, crimped Achilles tendon at the moment the foot hits the ground. The second picture shows the Achilles tendon stretched out as the body is rolling over top of the foot and that foot's going into more dorsiflexion. The third picture shows the Achilles shortened again after it's recoiled. So it goes from being short to stretched out when it goes into dorsiflexion during mid-stance, and then at toe-off, it recoils back with all that elastic energy and becomes short again. Now going back to the stiffness side of things, Hooke's law tells us the amount of force that a spring can produce is equal to the amount that it stretches multiplied by its inherent stiffness. So that's F equals negative KX. You don't want a lot of stretch to go through the Achilles because that would take a lot of time and keep you on the ground longer. So to get more force out of your springs, you want to increase the stiffness side of the equation. So if we look at this graph here, we have force on the y-axis, stretch on the x-axis. The red line is a tendon with low stiffness, while the green line is a tendon with high stiffness. when they're stretched to the same amount, so if you look at the endpoint here, they have the exact same amount of stretch on the x-axis, the high stiffness tendon recoils with significantly more force. So if we increase the stiffness of the tendon and we have the same amount of stretch, we're going to get more force out of every elastic recoil. The second subcategory is post-chain pulling. We're not pushing anymore. So acceleration is characterized by piston-like actions where the shins shoot up and down in a straight line. Max velocity, on the other hand, is characterized by cyclical actions where the shins follow an oval path, and you can see that in the picture there. At max velo, the body's mechanics should move away from the conscious pushing effort that's helpful in acceleration and instead rely on the posterior chain's ability to execute rapid reflexive pawing or stepping down actions. The hip extensors, which are mainly the hamstrings, adductors, and glute max, play an increasing role as speed approaches near maximal values, which is typically above 7 meters per second or 15.6 miles per hour. So the faster we're going, the more we're going to be dominant on the posterior chain side of things. We're going to rely more on those hamstrings, the glutes, and the adductor magnus than we did early on. Moving on to our second North Star objective, applying force quickly. Our first subcategory here is to have short ground contact times. If you're truly at max velo, by definition, you're not going to get any faster. So the whole point of max velo is to try to minimize braking forces and not slow down. The more time you spend on the ground, the more braking force is going to be applied. So you want to put a stupid high amount of force in the ground in a stupid short amount of time. Elite sprinters will be off the ground in under 1/10 of a second. And you can see in that picture there, we have Isaac, who's a very good college football player. He got off the ground in this one in about 0.13 seconds. He was probably 30 yards into a 40-yard dash on a grass surface. And so I think if we went and took this out a little further and had him on a more hard surface like the track, he'd be able to get off the ground even faster than that. The second subcategory is to have a fast swing leg recovery. If your swing leg recovery is too slow, you're going to end up with excessive backside mechanics and ultimately a foot that stays on the ground too long. We're going to talk more about excessive backside mechanics a little bit later on. We talked about what the issue is with the foot staying on the ground too long just in our last subcategory. You want to spend more time in flight, which is where both feet are in the air, than you do on the ground. And you can see that in the picture there. We have flight phase where both of Ian's feet are up in the air, and your support phase where one of the feet are on the ground. The ratio of ground contact time to flight time shifts dramatically as you get into max velo. In early acceleration, ground contact accounts for roughly 67% of the stride cycle. At max velo, however, only 40 to 45% of the stride cycle is spent on the ground. Our third subcategory is negative foot speed. This is a really important concept I want you to understand. Negative foot speed is what makes this whole thing work. Negative foot speed means your foot is traveling backwards faster at ground contact than your body is traveling forward over the ground. Think of max velocity as similar to spinning a globe. Once you accelerate the globe up to speed, if you just let it go, air resistance will slow it down. You have to intervene and make contact with the globe again to keep it spinning at that speed. However, you have to make sure your hand is moving faster than the ball is already spinning, or else it'll just slow the globe down more. If you have your hand on the globe too long when you're trying to spin it, you're inevitably going to slow down. You want to slap it quickly and get off of it. This minimizes the braking forces that you apply. In the same way, you want to apply force to the ground through your foot quickly to minimize braking forces during max velo. Our final North Star objective is to apply force at the correct angle. Our first subcategory on that is to get vertical and horizontal. During true max velo, your acceleration is null, meaning you're no longer increasing your speed. This means that net horizontal force becomes negligible, approaching approximately 0% of the total force vector. You still produce horizontal force, but it's equal to the braking forces, which are mostly air resistance. As a result, the vertical component of the ground reaction force makes up almost 100% of the total force vector at max velo. The vertical force counteracts gravity to keep you upright. To say it simply, a net positive horizontal force helps you go faster, a net positive vertical force keeps you upright. During max velo, you aren't getting any faster, so your horizontal force is not positive. You just want to produce enough horizontal force to stop yourself from slowing down. I do feel it's important to note that while net horizontal forces are null at true max velo, Max velo and acceleration exist on a continuum, meaning you can be upright and look like you're in a max velo. You can have those upright cyclical actions and still have non-zero net horizontal force and be accelerating forward. So just because you're upright doesn't mean you're not getting any faster, but if you're truly at max velo, by definition, you are not getting any faster and you don't have a positive net horizontal force. You can see some of these force vectors in this picture of Lyra here. The green lines represent force vectors that Lyra is producing. The red lines represent force vectors that are working to slow her down. The gravity force vector is the down red line, and the air resistance is the horizontal red line. So you can see that the green line that's going horizontal and the red line that are going horizontal are the same size, so they completely wipe each other out. That's a zero horizontal force total force vector. Now, with the vertical lines, the green line is bigger than the red line is, and so we have a net positive vertical force vector. So the total force vector, when you add them all up, is going to be nearly 100% vertical. All right, our second subcategory in the apply force at the correct angle subsection is to just get a bit in front. So your foot should land roughly 3 to 6 inches in front of your center of mass. Landing too far forward increases the braking forces applied and limits your lower limb's ability to contribute horizontal force generation through the pawing action. All right, so what does that all mean? If you get too far in front of yourself, you're going to slow yourself down. You apply a braking force, and then you're not able to actually generate that horizontal pawing action like we talked about in the last section. Your foot needs to strike the ground with the ball of your foot. If your heel is hitting the ground first, you're striking too far in front of yourself, applying unnecessary braking force and placing a lot of unnecessary strain on your hamstring. So that's one of the most important takeaways here is not only does striking too far out in front of yourself slow yourself down, now you can elongate your stride so it might look like you get faster temporarily, but once you train those mechanics, normally you end up getting faster with the proper mechanics. But regardless, you're going to reduce the amount of strain that are on your hamstring, so you're going to stay healthier in the long run, which means you can get more training reps in, which means you can get faster, which means you can participate in the game more because you're not very athletic whenever you're injured. And you can see the picture here of Katie. The first picture shows Katie striking the ground with her heel at least a full 12 inches in front of her body. So she's striking with her heel. It's far out in front of her center of mass. You can see that has her leaning forward a little bit, gives her what we're going to talk about excessive backside mechanics in the next section. Whereas the second picture here shows some technical changes we made to have her strike more on the ball of her foot closer to her body. So she's probably close to that 3 to 6 inch mark. Her knees are more closely together at ground contact. We have a better max velo picture. There's less strain going through her hamstring. She's applying less braking force. She's going to be able to keep herself moving faster for a longer period of time. All right, our third subcategory here is backside versus frontside mechanics. Now, I've alluded to the backside mechanics twice now, so this is a little bit of foreshadowing. We're coming to something we talked a little bit already about. Your foot is going to trace an ellipse, but the shape of that ellipse makes a big difference. Backside mechanics are what happen when the foot is behind the body. Frontside mechanics refer to everything that happens in front of the body. If you push too far out the backside, that's going to result in poor swing leg recovery and failure to drive the front knee forward. These are referred to as excessive backside mechanics and can be identified by the foot tracing a horizontal elliptical pattern. Excessive backside mechanics can result from the pelvis being dumped forward, weak quads, poor coordination, or simply trying too hard. If you push too hard, you're going to end up being too far backside. Excessive frontside mechanics aren't really a problem, but if you're deficient on the front side, that's most likely related to having excessive backside mechanics. Now, this might make a little bit more sense when we look at the picture of Katie here. We can see that the picture on the left with the red ellipse shows a flat horizontal pattern that her foot follows, whereas the picture on the right shows that green ellipse, which is more vertical. It's less squished downwards, and that's going to keep her more front side. We get more front side knee lift, which leads into everything we talked about earlier. It keeps you from being so far out in front of your body and landing on your heel. It allows you to apply a more appropriate negative foot speed. It allows you to have shorter ground contact times. It allows you to activate more post chain as opposed to staying in that quad a little bit too long. So the staying front side is one of the first things that we look to clean up. It's one of the lowest hanging fruit that allows us to get more bang for our buck in a short amount of time. All right, I want to talk about the kinogram. Credit should always be given where it is due, and the Altus team has done an incredible job of simplifying sprint coaching. The Altus kinogram method is a simple way to objectively examine an athlete's sprint cycle during max velo. We take pictures at 5 phases of the cycle, and then we look further down them to observe characteristics and other areas for improvement. The 5 phases they have identified are toe off, max vertical projection, strike, touchdown, and full support. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes about where you can find their full breakdown. It's a great article. But to make this system more simplified and actionable, I've chosen the 3 most important markers to look for in each phase. Okay, so I'm providing you here with a full kinogram. This is of Lyra. I'm actually going to provide you with 2 full kinograms. The first one is going to be a full kinogram of Lyra before any intervention whatsoever. This is the first day we ever went to the field to work on longer speed. Now, Lyra is an incredibly explosive athlete and has all the physical tools needed to be successful. The next picture, however, is a full kinogram from the second time we went to the field after making some technical changes. As we work through each phase, I want you to compare Lyra's before and after positions with the criterion pictures shown and identify what errors there were in the first kinogram, what changes were made, and what changes might still need to be made. Now, this is the second time she's ever worked on max velo with us, and so the second kinogram isn't perfect. There's still stuff to clean up, which is what you're going to see in real life. So we have our starting point, which we had a lot to clean up, and then we have our next point, our second session, which still has stuff to clean up, but there's definitely improvement from the first session. All right, so with this first phase, we're talking about toe off. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to define this, I'm going to show you the picture, and then I'm going to talk about the problems list. If you want more information in the newsletter, we have a big 3 checklist to go exactly what you're supposed to look like, but I'm just going to go through the problems list to make this a little bit more actionable for you. So the definition of toe off is the last frame at which the rear leg or the stance leg, so the leg that's on the ground, the last frame at which that foot is still in contact with the ground. So if you went a little bit further, that toe would be off the ground. The problems list, things we're looking for that you might need to clean up. If your backside hip is in too much extension, so your backside knee ends up too far behind you. Extension is where your thigh is going behind you. So if your back leg knee is too far behind you, that can be an issue. If your back leg knee is completely straight, that is an issue. These both indicate that you're over pushing horizontally. That encourages, guess what? Excessive backside mechanics, which leads to a slow recovery. So you'll often see excessive hip extension, which is where that backside thigh is too far behind you, and excessive lordosis, which is too much arching of your low back, go hand in hand. The next problem is having insufficient front knee lift. So your front thigh is not parallel to the ground. You want to make sure your front thigh is parallel to the ground at toe off. And the last issue is having a closed backside elbow. You don't want your backside elbow to be too closed. You want to have it open. All right, our next phase is max vertical projection, or MVP. Now stay with me through this one. I'm going to clarify it in a second. MVP is the point at which there is maximal vertical displacement of the center of mass as determined by the lowest point where a line drawn through both feet is parallel to the ground. That's a lot of words and stuff. And so you're going to look for the flight phase, so both feet are in the air. Where are your feet in line with each other? If you drew a line from one foot to the other, that line would be parallel to the ground. That is your max vertical projection phase. So the problems list, things we want to clean up. If you have a closed front side knee, so we want that front side knee to be open to 110 degrees. If your front side knee is tucked, it's not open to 110 degrees, that's a problem. If you have excessive lumbar extension, so again, if that's the same thing as lordosis from the last section, if your low back is arched, that's a problem. And if you have excessive hip extension, so if your backside knee is too far behind you, that's a problem. That follows the exact same pattern from the section above, the last phase. If you have too much hip extension, that's going to be an issue. It's going to cause excessive backside mechanics, or it is excessive backside mechanics, and it results in slow recovery. Our next phase is the strike phase. Strike is the point at which the rear leg knee, so the back knee, is directly vertical to the pelvis. The backside knee is directly underneath the pelvis. The femur, which is the thigh, is perpendicular to the ground, and both feet are still in the air. That's an important part here because the problems list, the entire problems list is you might not have a strike phase. Some athletes will not have a strike phase at all because the femur gets perpendicular to the ground after touchdown has happened. So they've completely skipped the strike phase. So that femur, the thigh bone, might be perpendicular to the ground after that front leg foot has already contacted the ground. So touchdown, which is our next phase, has already happened. We never had a true strike phase. If you don't have a true strike phase, that indicates excessive backside mechanics. We need to get you more front side. All right, touchdown phase. Touchdown is the point at which the front foot first contacts the ground. So the very first frame you can find where your toe or your heel, if you're a little bit too backside, contacts the ground. All right, so the problems list. The first problem could be a significantly trailing swing leg knee. So that means that your knee might still be way too far behind you, which is similar to the strike phase we talked about above. The next problem is an open swing leg knee, meaning that your knee is not tucked tight. You want to have your knee bent. You want to have that knee very, very bent so that your heel is basically in contact with your glutes. You want your heel basically on your buttocks right there. The next problem is that first contact happens with the heel or the entire foot. We don't want the contact to happen with the heel. We talked about that earlier, and we don't want the whole foot to contact the ground at the same time. We want your toes or the balls of your feet to contact the ground first. And the last problem is that contact happens more than 6 inches in front of your center of mass. All right, so the full support phase. The definition is the frame where the foot is directly under the pelvis. The toe of the foot should be vertical with the ASIS of the pelvis. Okay, so what does that mean? The ASIS is the anterior superior iliac spine. You don't need to know that. Basically, you just need to have your toe even with the front of your hips, and you want your heel to be even with the back of your hips. So your foot is basically fully underneath your pelvis. The problems list. You have an open swing leg knee. Again, we don't want your swing leg knee to be open. We need it tucked tight where it's basically in contact with your buttocks. Another issue is the swing leg is less than 45 degrees from vertical. So we want to have a figure 4. We want a figure 4 position where your swing leg, thigh, and knee make a 4 with your stance leg, thigh, and knee. So if your swing leg isn't 45 degrees from the ground, so if that thigh isn't 45 degrees from the ground, then we're not making that figure 4 position. The heel has already risen off the ground is another issue. We want to make sure that your foot is flat on the ground at this point in time. We don't want that heel coming off too early. That indicates that we don't have the requisite timing. And the last one is having too much give or flexion at the hip and the knee. So if you're really just giving into it, you're sinking into it too much, that means we don't have enough stiffness. All right, now I want to leave you with a quick thought on bugs versus features. So I live 30 minutes away from the performance facility that I own. 30 minutes. That's not fun, especially when unexpected problems pop up or when I have to work a split shift. So I'm here from 6 to 8 a.m. with a morning group, and then I have to come back from 3 to 8 p.m. What do I do in the middle time? Do I go home? That's another additional 30 minutes each way. Poor me, right? What if, however, that's a feature, not a bug? A bug is something that's wrong with your machine. Your favorite apps release updated versions that fix those bugs in the old version. Bugs aren't supposed to be there. Features, on the other hand, are intentionally designed components. They serve a purpose. They don't need fixed. I find myself getting way too caught up trying to debug my life. I fixate on my problems and constantly try to solve them. But if I step back, it's pretty easy for me to reframe a lot of those bugs as features that actually make my life a whole lot better. Now, let me give you some examples. Bug, I live 30 minutes from my business. Feature reframe, I have a full hour of solo car time each day that I can dedicate to learning through podcasts and audiobooks. Bug, our house is small. Our house is less than 1,000 square feet. Feature reframe, our family spends a lot of time in close proximity with each other, and we have a lot less house to constantly keep clean with 2 little ones. Bug, it's been really hard for me to find a full-time coach who meets our standards to help us grow the business. Feature reframe, I've had to get really good at getting more out of less via automation, systems, and processes. Additionally, I've had to be very deliberate about finding ways to develop coaches for the future with our internship and coaching assistant programs. This short-term pain will result in a long-term pipeline to develop elite coaching talent. It might seem like semantics, but I've personally found it so freeing to reframe bugs as features. I highly suggest you try it. That annoying 1-hour drive to practice twice a week, what an amazing time to have your teenager captive and have meaningful conversation with them. Those expensive tournaments that take up your entire summer traveling across the region, what awesome memories you and your family will have to look back on. That awful injury that makes you miss your entire season, what an incredible time to discover who you are outside of your sport. If you have any bugs that you can reframe as features, shoot me an email, shoot me a message. I'd love to hear them. And I want to let you know that I am doing a Ask Me Anything podcast in the next couple of weeks. So if you have any athlete development, sports performance, rehab, or life questions for me, send them to me. You can email them to me. There's going to be a link in the newsletter, or you can just message me on Instagram. And that's all I've got for you today. Go be great out there, gang.
Straight A student, but I'm friends with the cool kids. Following the rules and the rubric.